Hello, my loves. Continue to update new stories on Reddit, and don't forget if you like it, please subscribe and like it. Now let's start new stories. Story: I'm fine with my mom cheating on my dad, and even encouraged her to live with his new man. It's been 5 months since I set my foot on the US, and every day is a living hell to me. I have never really wanted to settle and study here, but now it is like I was forced to live like this for possibly years before becoming on my own. It's not America per se that is the problem, but the circumstance under which I got here. TLDR at the end of this TED Talk. To start with, my family really wanted us to study abroad and hopefully move to the US as I grow up, considering my other relatives already living there. TBH, I had no interest in going to the US to seek opportunity, and I surmised life would be depressing to me, at least. So I continued minding my own business in high school, making friends, getting grades, dating. In 10th grade, the concern of studying abroad rose to me, but I was too skeptical to think about it. I even thought my family intended to have me complete high school before moving, so I shook it off. Then in 11th grade, my parents paid for me to study SAT. Now I knew the matter was drawing closer to me day by day, so I started researching my own future plan before my parents take over. Little did I know, my parents sealed a deal with the Language Center to assist me with studying abroad. I tried to convince the center otherwise, but they already settled with my parents that the path to studying in the US was inevitable. I then tried to persuade my parents, but they ignored my request and they blamed on me for depending on others on your future career. I was speechless because my plan was screwed and I had to come to terms with the so-called American dream. At least they would give me a chance to graduate high school in Vietnam, right? Spoiler alert, well shit. So flash forward to summer 2023, as I finished 11th grade. I learned of a month-long vacation to the US. My parents told the purpose of the trip was to visit universities I and my sis will study in the future. Once again, I hoped this was just another post-COVID vacation and I could return home to continue 12th grade. Before leaving Vienna, I saw my GF for the last time and headed off. And here we are, the United States. We met the long-time no-see relative families and finally got into an empty flat. Why couldn't we stay in a hotel or something, but this very deserted flat in a strangely odd community? Yeah, it was at this moment that I knew my parents deceived me. I would be staying here for a while, studying right in the US, and having a new life. All my hope was gone. My heart shattered, but nobody seemed to bat an eye. My final high school year in Vietnam was gone, my loved ones were far away, and I couldn't even have a way back. I mean, my family had a well-planned trip around the US and go home, but it was just an excuse to go past immigration. When I confronted them, my parents said they needed to have a more relaxing life in the US. My sis was about to enter college soon, and I was forced to accept that life was better here. I hid my cries and felt blank, and next I had to confront my GF. People usually chastised early love, but I ignored what they said and let us glide over distance love. The following days, we went to the newcomer center, and boom, I was now a student of a local high school. All my effort in Vietnam turned to waste, and what worse, I was sorted to junior class aka 11th grade here. In other words, the road to independence was extended by a year unless I was an exorbitant child prodigy, but I was not. 5 months had passed, and I didn't make much true friends here. My contact in Vietnam was now only my GF, and we had frequent arguments, but in the end we deeply missed each other. I suffered from day-to-day depression, because I felt lonely. The other people in my family kept praising the US, but I felt sick of it because of absurd culture shock and I couldn't forgive them for deceiving me. Now my future plan was vague, and I had constant suicidal thought, but the worst part was I couldn't tell my parents how I felt. They just kept bringing up valid arguments to shut me up. I hated being forced to love American life. I know there are difficulties and setbacks in Vietnam, but I don't have the choice to choose my path. Money does not give happiness, and I'm afraid nobody's on my side. Anyways, what I want to do now is to just proceed on living like this for a while, then I could devise another plan and execute it right away. I want to escape the dependency on my family and live on my own by being the best I could be, whatever the career I choose. I would take my naivety as a lesson to be able to decide things on my own, but everything seems to be unstable for me right now. In the end, I miss my home country, my loved one, and I want to leave the US immediately. There's nothing in the US that would keep me back, even money. That's the story I want to tell today. Thanks for reading. Story: my mom exploited me for almost 10 years. When I was 14, I went to live with my dad who lived in North Carolina. I would only visit him for summers, but one summer when I was 14, I got beat up by my mom over eating the last fruit snacks. She was having a hard time with her baby daddy in jail, and she, I guess, took it out on me. She kicked me in my stomach a few times, and the next day, I went to my therapist as usual and confessed. When I got in the car, the therapist told my mom, and she got pissed because Child Protective Services were involved now. She called my dad and told him to pick me up immediately. So, of course, he packed up his 2 kids and his wife and drove 10 hours from Charlotte, North Carolina to Detroit, Michigan. He had done this drive many times, so he could get there even faster now. My mom told my dad what happened and told him to keep me for the summer. My dad ignored that and took advantage of the situation. He took me to this place, which I'm guessing was where the social workers were, and had me repeat the story to them. The next thing I know, I'm in North Carolina longer than the summer, and I began to be homeschooled by my stepmom. My mom was pissed I didn't come back, but I thought it was the right thing to do so my mom's other kids wouldn't be caught up in the system. If I was gone, they should be safe, right? So I stayed and was homeschooled for my high school years. Since I wasn't up to speed on the grade level I should have been, my stepmom decided that I repeat my 9th grade with her again. Throughout that time of being homeschooled, she barely taught me. I feel she had the intention to but didn't. My brother, who was under 10 years, and I would sit in the apartment all the time doing nothing but watching TV and going to church events. She would have us go to this homeschool event for speech and debate, but it wasn't much. I didn't have any social life or friends. I didn't really see anyone or do anything unless it was people at church or church events. But I did tap into my creativity there. I was painting nice canvases, drawing more than I ever knew I could, and writing books that I eventually published years later when I was an adult. Anyways, I always felt as if my stepmom didn't like me. She always had comments like, "You remind me of your mother." At the time, I didn't know my mom had done really bad things to her, so as a kid, I was confused and felt odd. I eventually spoke up to my dad one day about it, and he didn't believe she wasn't teaching me. So one day, I got tired of feeling so left out of the family and called my mom and decided to run away. Basically, I took a Greyhound bus back to Detroit. I was 17. That was when I was in 11th grade. So I stayed there for 2 years for 9th and 10th grade. By the time summer was over, I felt a shock that I hadn't been to school in a few years, and I didn't pass or know anything. My stepmom made up transcripts to get me into my 11th grade classes. She made up 9th and 10th grade, so I was jumping into 11th grade lost. Then, I didn't know how to make friends. I was an easy target to get bullied for being weird. That's when I started to try to commit suicide. I wanted to be normal so bad, and I felt so weird not being normal that I got so depressed. I had a good 10 attempts and was hospitalized for each one. I struggled with passing my classes, got bullied by coaches and students, which made me suicidal and hospitalized. They falsely diagnosed me with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and a good for more mental disabilities. I was taking 10 to 15 pills per day, giving me bad side effects like drooling. I looked like a drug addict. I ended up going back to being homeschooled my last few months of high school and thankfully graduated. She didn't allow my dad to attend my graduation because she felt it was messed up what my stepmom did. My mom decided to put me in the system so she could be paid as a caregiver for me. I was fine, though. I wasn't truly sick, just depressed, so I never understood why she did that. Now, I'm on disability, and the state is paying for this company to fund her to take care of me. She put a guardian over me who was my aunt, and from there, she would get raises over the 9 years she worked for me as my caregiver. For 9 years, I would ask her every so often if I could work. She would tell me, let me figure it out and save. Keep in mind, she was getting paid well. She didn't give me any money, but she started to get greedy and wanted other people to work for me too, so she would hire my cousins and her boyfriends, and they would split the checks and give the other half to her. I never got a penny. By now, I was like 20 to 25 years old, and I never understood any of this. I just trusted my mama. I thought I was disabled by then and felt my purpose in life was to fund hers. She would call me high functioning and take me to workshops for people with disabilities. They would question me, thinking I worked there because I looked normal. I even had people tell me to do my job and change diapers. The workshop is a daycare for disabled adults. I didn't go often because I felt out of place. She would embarrass me and have my cousins pick me up like I truly wasn't stable. When she would allow me to work, it was at McDonald's, and it was only 2 hours a week through the workshop working program. She would make me take the city smart bus with old and disabled people, so I didn't want to continue. Keep in mind she was getting paid to take me places. When I had a job at 17, right before she put me on disability, I worked at Checkers, and they told me I was doing so well they wanted to hire me as a manager. She told them no because I needed to start my disability SSI check. Fast forward to me at 24. I just had no purpose, was still depressed, and felt my only reason for life was to help my mama babysit my baby brother and give her money. I eventually met my now fiancé on Snapchat. He eventually moved in with me because I ended up living alone in my mama's house as she moved to a nicer city. He helped me get out more, and I felt normal. I finally had a reason to live, and I wasn't as depressed. But she would make me want to fall backward when she would yell and be mad at me for not helping her clock in and out for her caregiving job. If I did it wrong, she would be pissed because she was outsmarting the system. I was supposed to have 24-hour care. She had my brother, who was 19, working as my caregiver too. So I had to clock in for both and keep up with not messing up. She would say she would go to jail if they caught us. Since I felt my life was for her, I would feel super depressed about messing up. One day after years of being suicidal-free, I tried it again with my fiancé present. He called my mama, and she told him she didn't care, she was on a date night. It was his job to take care of me now. After that, he stopped viewing her in a good light and started watching her actions. He would tell me, one day, I'm going to get you out of this situation. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought I was living a decent life. I thought the things I craved weren't real for me. To make the story shorter, years later, my mama forced me on a trip with her. I told her I only had $50, and she said that was fine, she'd pay for me there. Her plans on the trip didn't go as planned, so she asked me to get gas money. I told her I didn't want to because that was all my money. She got mad, tossed my phone, and started to beat me again, also throwing a chair over my back and head multiple times, repeating how she hates me and that I'm not her daughter. She went on with cruel, unnecessary words. Keep in mind, I hadn't said a thing or touched her. I was in shock. She then said she was going to call the police and lock me up in a mental hospital because I'm suicidal. I was confused, but I finally snapped out of it and realized she never had any pure intentions for me. She then said I needed to get out of her house when we got back home. So I called my fiancé, asked him to buy me a plane ticket, and I flew back home. I called my social worker and told her about the situation. I just left out the part where she was beating me because I didn't want her in trouble. My fiancé and I packed our bags with my dog and we began living homeless. In the process of 2 weeks living in the van, she called my doctors to try to get emergency custody over me and told everyone I was trying to kill myself and having a schizophrenic episode. Turns out, she didn't want me to leave her because she was not going to get paid. Story, I think my stepmom killed my dad, and it sickens me how relieved his death made me. My biological father and the woman I call stepmother, who will be called Kathy, must have seemed like a very happy couple. Kathy seemed to like my father very much, and they had similar views on most things. I cut off contact with my father when I turned 18, with only birthday messages filling the chat box. I wanted to reconnect someday, but after understanding how much pain he had caused my mother and me, after therapy opened my eyes, I felt wrong in forgiving him. To really understand my thinking, I have to tell you about my father. My father was not a good man during most of my childhood. He not only abused my mother and me, but also abused substances such as alcohol and drugs. Most of my mental disorders were the result of his heavy drug use while my mother was pregnant. All of my siblings suffered from the same disorder, which shows how long my father used these substances. This caused him to do a lot of things that he would later be angry about, the biggest of which was not trying to quit. His inaction to help with his addiction led my mother to file for divorce after becoming pregnant with my baby, and he only saw us supportively in the months that followed. I don't completely blame my father for how he became a member. My grandparents were immigrants from the boat with an extremely loose line when it came to discipline and abuse, which is my polite way of saying that mistreatment wasn't in their vocabulary. While my grandfather cherished me, he was an authoritative man with a heavy hand while my father was a child. My father was the best he could offer growing up. He was taught that physical action was discipline, and he used what he learned. We'll never erase the good things he did, or the happy times we shared. But I can still remember one night, crying when he hit my mother or me. Or the nights when my mother lay in bed with me and I asked, "When is that monster leaving the house?" He didn't tell me when to come home because he worked away from home and would stay with his mother, my grandmother, on weekdays. I don't know if that's true, but I highly suspect that he also cheated multiple times on those nights that week. When my mother finally kissed my father, I felt like a chain was breaking. My mother was freed from his hands every time he drank alcohol or used drugs. My father did not accept kissing with the same level of optimism. My dad would bring the girls home, and every time my siblings and I saw him, he was on a date with someone else. Until one visit, it was still that girl. This is when Kathy appears. She was kind to me, but honestly, I attribute that to the fact that I can actually take care of myself when the kids need help with eating, bathing, and dressing. She also didn't have a daughter of her own, so she showed me a lot of things that my overprotective mother didn't, little things like how to horn and how to hold a gun. I think I quit because of Kathy, after realizing he didn't want to ruin 2 marriages. He was different than before I cut off contact. I can remember exactly how I received the information. I was at the mall and talking to a high school friend I hadn't seen in years. My mother texted me to come home, it was very important. I said goodbye to my friend before going home and found my mom out in the backyard with my aunt and uncle, who was my dad's friend before he started using drugs. And it was there that my mother told me that my father must die of a rare genetic disease, information that I still do not fully know, although it is very important information. Kathy talked to my grandmother, and the news spread through the family. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why do you think your stepmother killed your father? Reader, it is because the circumstances of his death were so surprising. Peace of mind. Just a few hours ago, my dad posted on his social media about the election and other things. The next day, he died from a genetic disease that I, having lived for over 20 years of my life, knew he had. That no one seems to know he has that disease. Furthermore, Kathy did not have a post-mortem experience and cremated him right at the hospital. She didn't tell us anything about how, when, where, or why he died. No name of the hospital, no doctor, no funeral or visitation, nothing. The feeling of relaxation when he passed away makes me feel guilty to this day. My father had a habit of lying to me and my family, and the fact that he could no longer act condescendingly towards us made me a little happy. I said I care about inheritance. My father has a habit: take out all my savings if you need money. At that time I didn't want money, I just felt at peace because I wasn't afraid of him coming back to deceive my family again. But part of me wonders if the data here is a genetic disease. I wouldn't be surprised if my father started using again and drained the account, just like he did during his days with my mother. Perhaps Kathy had fallen victim to my father as my mother had, and was simply angry. But, as unlikely as that may seem, he did very well. I thought that Kathy had killed my father to secure his money, that at last, my father had an equal to Kathy. Perhaps Kathy was the abuser and my father the victim, and sweet karma had come to collect the long-needed debts. What really strengthens my theory is the fact that my cousin and I think alike. My cousin and I are like night and day, black and white, sun and moon. We are complete opposites. So the fact that we just think alike means hell has frozen over. Kathy finally gave me a box of things. I expected she didn't want anything. I'm still upset that she disappeared after that, with no explanation or answer. However, my father's family didn't like her very much, so she had no reason to stay. I don't champion that she passed away so quickly. If she was truly in mourning, she would have had to sort out a lot of things physically and mentally. However, sometimes I finish the quest, so I try to learn about her. Kathy was a crazy woman, and to be honest, the mystery of my father's illness and sudden death stilled my mind in those terrifying minutes of the night. Story: I, 30M, hit my father, 51M, for a past mistake. I am from Peru, from a provincial city. When I was 18 years old, my cousin, who is the same age as mine, accused me of having raped her. She and I were very close since we were children, since we used to spend time together. Due to family problems, she began to have depression. It wasn't like before. Now all she did was scream, get angry, or even blame me because I didn't have the same problems as her. The truth is, I was trying to help her, but my own mental health was beginning to deteriorate, so I decided little by little to move away. Months passed and I had no contact with her until one day my father came to my house and called me. I went out to meet him and he received me with a slap in the face. It should be noted that my father had never hit me before. Who did that was my mother, and only for specific reasons. When I asked him about the reason behind the hit, he slapped me again and told me to get out of the house, that his brother, my cousin's father, had told him that my cousin said that I raped her and that's why she was so depressed. Apparently her dad realized that she was cutting herself, and to get out of it she just blamed me for everything. My cousin didn't press charges, obviously because there is no proof, but still my dad told me that my uncle wanted to beat me up. My dad was disappointed in me. He hit me again, called me an abuser, insulted me and told me to get out of his house. My mom was always a submissive person with him, so she didn't say anything to him. I simply, with my lip bleeding, grabbed my most valuable things and left. Thank God I had my savings on my card from what I had worked for, and I was able to go to the capital by public transportation. Once in the capital, I managed to rent a small room, I had a bad time for the next few years. I had a couple or two for a few years and jumping from job to survive. When I was 20 years old, my partner at that time told me that I could work at the KFC where she worked as a delivery order receptionist. The part-time job paid well, and with the bonuses you could even earn double or triple my salary, so I worked there doing the best I could while studying a technical degree in administration. Years passed and I ended up becoming a supervisor and then manager of that store thanks to my technical degree in business administration. At the age of 25, I became a partner with a former university classmate with whom I still had contact. She is a lawyer, and the age of 27 we got married. It was a small wedding because both she and I are modest with expenses and because I had no family to invite. We currently have a 1-year-old son whom I love with all my soul. It was after this that everything went to hell. Today in the middle of the afternoon there was a knock at my door. It was my parents. It had been more than a decade since I had seen them. I was frozen, but not with fear, but with anger. My dad asked me if he could come in. I told him no, so we talked in a nearby park. In short, they told me that my cousin had committed suicide and that in her letter she confessed the whole truth, that the person who actually abused her was her mother's brother, and that everything was orchestrated by him to be able to cover up and other things. The truth is I was very indifferent. For me, whoever accuses of those crimes deserves to suffer them in flesh, so I didn't feel sorry for her. I told them kindly, and resisting my urge to yell at them, to go away and never contact me again, that they were dead to me. When I stood up from the bench to go home, my dad grabbed me by the shoulder. He told me that we have to keep talking. I told him no. He insisted. I told him no. He insisted again. So I turned around and instinctively gave him a hit. I don't know when my dad became so weak. Any Latino knows that countrymen are quite strong, but one hit was enough to break his nose. He stood stunned looking at me with his eyes open and his nose bleeding, and my mom was covering her mouth, for some reason that I don't explain. My next reaction was to throw myself at him. It wasn't difficult to knock him to the ground and I continued hitting him. When he started to cover his face, I started hitting his head or forehead. I'll not lie, it felt liberating. I felt like I was crying while I hit him and I continued until my right hand was hurting. My mother stood still. For some reason she didn't do anything. She just stood there watching and crying. By that time it was already night and in our area it was difficult to find people on the street, even less so considering that today there is a soccer game. My mom helped my dad and took a taxi. She didn't say anything to me. She didn't scream. She just cried, and as soon as she grabbed my dad she ran away. I'm not lying. If she had tried to intervene, maybe she would have gotten the same treatment. A few hours later my mother writes to me on my cell phone. Apparently they contacted a friend from university, I still have my social networks active, who told them where I lived, saying that my father needs a septum reconstruction because it was perforated in dental reconstruction for having 4 broken teeth. Everything was going to cost the equivalent of $4,000, which is a lot of money here. Not a fortune, but it's a lot. I have already been clear with her. I am not going to put in a single cent. For my sake, she and my dad could end up just like my cousin. I don't care. She has been calling me, asking for forgiveness for everything, that she wants to come back into my life, that she was afraid and that she should have protected me or at least believed me. According to her, my dad felt the same, and according to him, he deserves every hit I gave him. I guess we agree on that. I told my wife everything. She already knew what happened in the past with my parents. She just told me that she understood, that, according to what I told her, my father died when he kicked me out of his house, so who did I hit was just a stranger with his face. I found her comparison funny and I agreed with her. She told me that if they tried legal measures we would simply say that it was in self-defense. A law was recently passed in which lethal force can even be used when it's about self-defense, so if something happens to him we can rely on that. Right now I'm glad I have a lawyer wife. I can't help but feel more liberated after this. My parents aren't poor, so I know they'll get the money for the operation. I hope they just aren't idiots enough to come back to my house. This is my home now, and if I have to beat them both to get the hell out of my life, I will. At the end of the day, they are the ones who started all this. I was just defending myself. I still feel a little euphoric and happy. The truth is, I am a little happy that they are suffering. They deserve it. I am happy with my life and my family, and I would protect them at any cost. That includes my parents. I needed to get this off my chest somehow, so I'm writing this to release it. Somehow telling it all has made me feel better. Story: Breaking the Chains. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there lived a woman named Sarah. To the outside world, Sarah had a perfect life, a loving husband, James, and 2 beautiful children. However, behind the closed doors of their immaculate home, Sarah's life was anything but perfect. James had a temper. What started as small outbursts of anger gradually escalated into verbal abuse, and eventually, physical violence. Sarah lived in constant fear, trying to shield her children from the horrors of their father's wrath. She often found herself making excuses for James's behavior, hoping that one day he would change. One evening, after an argument about a trivial matter, James's anger boiled over. He struck Sarah, leaving her with a swollen eye and bruises on her arms. As she lay on the floor, a wave of despair washed over her. She realized that this could not go on. She needed to protect herself and her children. The next day, Sarah mustered the courage to visit a local women's shelter. She met with a counselor named Lisa, who listened to her story with compassion and understanding. Lisa explained the cycle of abuse and assured Sarah that she was not alone. With Lisa's help, Sarah devised a plan to leave James safely. That night, after James had fallen asleep, Sarah quietly packed a few belongings and woke her children. They tiptoed out of the house and drove to the shelter, where they were welcomed with open arms. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. At the shelter, Sarah and her children found solace and support. The other women there shared their stories, and Sarah realized she was part of a community of survivors. With the help of the shelter staff, she began the process of rebuilding her life. She filed for a restraining order against James and started attending therapy sessions to heal from the trauma. Sarah also enrolled in a job training program offered by the shelter. She had always dreamed of becoming a nurse, and now she saw a chance to make that dream a reality. With determination and hard work, Sarah completed her training and secured a job at a local hospital. The children, too, began to thrive in the new environment. Free from the constant fear and tension, they excelled in school and made new friends. Sarah saw the light return to their eyes and knew she had made the right decision. Months turned into years, and Sarah's life transformed completely. She and her children moved into their own apartment, a place filled with love and laughter. Sarah continued her education, eventually becoming a registered nurse. She found fulfillment in helping others, using her experiences to connect with patients who had endured similar struggles. James, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his actions. The restraining order kept him away from Sarah and the children, and he was required to attend anger management classes. Over time, he began to understand the gravity of his behavior, but it was too late to undo the damage he had caused. Sarah's journey was not easy. She faced many challenges and moments of doubt, but she never gave up. With each step forward, she grew stronger and more resilient. She became an advocate for domestic violence survivors, sharing her story to inspire others to break free from the chains of abuse. In the end, Sarah's courage and determination not only saved her life, but also set an example for her children and countless others. Her story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the possibility of a brighter future, free from fear and violence. Story: abusive parent, toxic family, and high expectations, which makes me suffer endless even after being miles away. Currently, I am a 21-year-old student. I had to think of a way to escape my father because the abuse had been going on for a long time and no one in my family knew about it. I decided to study abroad because I thought it was the only way to escape, even if only for a short time. This was a decision I regretted because I was struggling in the classes of a course I didn't like at all, archaeology, which is not popular in my country, and I had to convince my family to take it. Study abroad. My parents also expected me to be the best and smartest student in the class. Since I was little, they always wanted me to study well and be smart. If my scores were bad, they would repeat that over and over again, and even if I got good scores, they still saw that they weren't perfect. They compare me with my smart friends and say I'm lazy and useless. They also forced me to study what they wanted after class 10. When I finished my studies, they put me in an engineering field that I begged them not to choose. I failed my classes and kept it a secret until a professor told my dad everything. Things got worse and I had to beg them to let me study another major, and finally they agreed to let me study history. After a year, I endured in engineering. My grades dropped dramatically in 10th grade, which is when I realized I was being abused by my father. I hate it, I feel disgusting. I had to pretend everything was fine at school and at home. No one knew. I didn't dare tell my friends because I was afraid they would consider me dirty. I couldn't sleep without locking the door because I was afraid he would do something. I always have to keep an eye on where he is, or I will lose control for fear of what he will do when no one is there. I try to stay near or around other family members. I'm very afraid of him. Even now, I still feel like he is watching me and sometimes touching me even though I am thousands of miles away from him, which makes me always in a state of tension and unable to concentrate, happy or even relaxing. All my favorite things like books, reading time, and car rides were ruined because he did something there, and I felt like all the things I loved were tainted. Plus, my father has an influential job, so I couldn't seek help legally or from any organization back home. My family also moved many times, so I always had difficulty making friends. I rarely talked to others. To add salt to the wound, they let my younger brother do whatever he wanted. He played cricket and was very serious about it. They let him choose easy subjects for higher classes and the course he wanted for college, while I had to give up badminton, which I had played for 7 years in 10th standard. Because I'm not good at studying. I don't hate my younger brother because that's when family feels like real family, when I can play with him, talk about things we like, and simply be brothers with fun games and competitions. Argued, while my dad was terrible and my mom criticized my grades and weight, calling me lazy all the time. In February 2023, near the end of the final semester of my undergraduate history major, there was talk about studying abroad, and I jumped at the opportunity because I felt it was the only way I could escape from my father. They paid for my tuition and accommodation in the new country. But I feel useless here because I don't know what to study. I felt useless and stupid among other students, and I felt very bad. I sought out a mental health counselor in college because psychotherapy became accessible for the first time. I still endure it because I have to call my parents every day. They make me feel guilty every time, saying they paid a lot of money, should study hard, get a job, and my mother talked about marrying someone and I should finish my master's program and PhD before age 25. I just want to drop out of college and run away sometimes. All I want is a simple job, not a high-end job like my parents want. All my life I wanted a small job, small things, and a simple life. I feel like I made the stupidest decision to come here because I didn't know how to study or even get a job. I only had 1 year in this country, and I was always afraid that I would be sent home. I was tired and afraid that my father would find out I was failing my classes again. I can't go to class and face students and professors. Even though I've been here for 4 months, I still haven't made any friends. I do not know what to do. I can't live alone, have no job, no money, and no visa to do it. I want to stay in this country and try to get by, but I have no way to do that. How can I get away from my parents and only keep in touch with my younger brother? I'm afraid that if they find out, they'll do something to me, or they'll kick me out on the street and talk bad about me with my younger brother and other family members and friends. I can't tell anyone, that's why I'm venting here. Story: A Brother's Silent Cry. In a small town nestled between rolling hills, there lived two brothers, Adam and Jake. Adam, the older of the two, was 14, while Jake was 10. They lived with their mother, Laura, and their stepfather, Paul, in a modest house at the end of a quiet street. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical family, but behind closed doors, a dark secret loomed. Paul, who had once seemed charming and kind, showed a different side after marrying Laura. His anger was unpredictable, and his temper often flared without warning. Unfortunately, Jake bore the brunt of Paul's rage. Adam often watched helplessly as Paul berated and sometimes hit Jake for the smallest infractions: spilled milk, a toy left out, or a simple mistake on homework. Jake, a quiet and gentle boy, would try to shrink into the background, but nothing seemed to protect him from Paul's wrath. One evening, while Adam was doing his homework, he heard a loud crash followed by Jake's cries. His heart pounded as he ran to the living room. There, he saw Paul standing over Jake, who was curled up on the floor, trying to shield himself. Without thinking, Adam stepped between them, facing his stepfather with a defiance he didn't know he possessed. "Leave him alone," Adam shouted, his voice trembling with both fear and anger. Paul glared at Adam, his eyes filled with fury. "You think you can tell me what to do, boy? Stay out of this." But Adam didn't move. He stood his ground, trying to protect his brother. Paul raised his hand, but just then, Laura entered the room. She saw the scene and rushed to Adam's side, placing herself between her sons and Paul. "That's enough, Paul," Laura yelled, her voice steady and resolute. "You need to leave. Now." Paul's face contorted with rage, but he didn't argue. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent except for Jake's sobs. Laura knelt beside him, holding him close and whispering words of comfort. Over the next few days, Laura took action. She filed a restraining order against Paul and sought help from a local domestic violence support group. She realized that she had to protect her children and herself from the man she once thought she knew. Laura and the boys moved into a shelter temporarily, where they received counseling and support. Adam was grateful for the change but still worried about Jake, who had become even quieter and more withdrawn. One day, a counselor named Mrs. Thompson sat with Adam and Jake for a session. She encouraged Jake to express his feelings, but he remained silent. Adam, feeling his brother's pain, gently held his hand. "It's okay, Jake," Adam said softly. "You're safe now. We're both safe." Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as he finally spoke. "I was so scared, Adam. I thought it would never end." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "It's natural to feel scared, Jake. But you're very brave, both of you. Healing takes time, but you're not alone. We're here to help you. With time, patience, and support, Jake slowly began to heal. He started to open up about his experiences and began to regain his confidence. Adam, always by his side, encouraged him every step of the way. Laura found a new job, and they moved into a small but cozy apartment. Life was not without its challenges, but the atmosphere was filled with love and safety. Adam and Jake grew closer, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Years later, Adam looked back on those dark days with a sense of pride. They had overcome so much, and their family had emerged stronger. He realized that standing up to Paul had been the turning point, not just for Jake, but for all of them. Adam and Jake's story became an inspiration to others in their community, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love and support in overcoming even the darkest times. Story: talk about family stories. I am a 17-year-old girl, but my father doesn't treat me right. I don't know why, but if he owes my brother just $2, he will find a way to give him that money right away. But with me, he's been owing me for a year and has never decided to pay me back. It's like he's saying, "You're my daughter, so I'm not going to pay you back." Isn't my brother your son too? How does that make sense? Every time there's something to do, it's always me. He says girls are supposed to be learning to do household chores and stuff, and I do it. But when it comes to my brother, he's like, no, he's a boy, he cannot do it. That's really biased, in my opinion. He's choosing boys over girls. The way he treats my brother is way different than how he treats me. I am the eldest child in our family, and my brother is the second after me. My father doesn't like me, because if my brother says, "Dad, I need some money," he'd be like, "I'll try to find a way to get you something." And then the next day, he comes up and brings him money, maybe the exact amount or even more. But when I ask for something, it's so difficult. One time, I have never touched even $50 from him. In order for me to get the money, I have to ask him every day, every single day, and he still does not want to give it to me. I have never touched $100 from my father in my life. If I get something, it has to be for school. But if it's for myself, I'll never get anything. Now I have graduated in 2024, and I still have got nothing from him. He didn't even go to my graduation. He didn't attend any of our graduations. Now that I've graduated, in order for me to get a job that I want, they told me I needed a bank account. But I'm still underage, so I was asking my father if he could help me get a bank account. He told me on my graduation day, but 2 weeks have passed, and I know he does not want to do it. He thought I would be like my mother. He thinks that I'm going to take all his nonsense like my mother did. Well, I'm not going to do that. He thinks that I'm gonna stay at home and just do women's chores and all those things. No, I'm going to be a big woman. I won't be like my mother, staying home and cooking for him all day while he treats her like trash. No, I'm not going to be like my mother. I'm going to be better. Story: what the hell happened? I hate him and everything about him. My day is instantly ruined when I remember that he's still alive. He failed as a father to all 3 of his kids, and he can't accept that fact because he's so fucking proud and arrogant. So, he takes out his anger on us and hits us like it's going to fix a damn thing. All this money and respect he's boasting about having is going to mean nothing when he's dead, which is soon, hopefully. He thinks what he's doing is correcting me or disciplining me, but he's only creating an enemy out of his own fucking daughter. And that's embarrassing. He's so used to everyone around him following him like fucking dogs that he can't stand it when there is someone who does not need him at all. He fucked up with my older sister, so they don't speak now. He's fucking up with my older brother and doesn't allow my brother to pick my side because he's so fucking insecure about someone being sick of his shit. But my brother will eventually get older, he will no longer need to follow his commands, and he will get married, have kids, and will cut contact. Guess who's gonna be left to turn to? That's right. Me. It's all tracing back to me, but he thinks I'm just a stupid child who has no idea what the fuck I'm doing and will eventually crawl back. I've crawled back long enough. I've tolerated his bullshit for so long, but this is the fucking last straw. I will grow up to be better than him, I will study harder, top classes, get an elite job, all in the name of shaming him. I will embarrass him so badly. His own daughter growing up to be a better person than he ever was and ever will be. He simply cannot stand the fact that the world does not revolve around him and that nobody is going to live to his point of view. He didn't make me, he's not the leader of anyone, he's not the president. Even the president doesn't get people to follow his point of view. Laws exist, but so do criminals. My point is, he's not important. Whether he likes it or not, he's just another hunk and waste of skin and bones, a useless piece of God's energy and time. I will sculpt the best life possible, just to make him eat his disgusting words. I'm planning to cut him off once I head off to college in a different country. I won't even tell him I'm going. I will make sure nobody tells him I'm going. I don't want him at any of my graduations, birthdays, wedding. Fuck, I don't even want him at my funeral if I were to die before him. I'm using my whole life as a vengeance plan to fucking destroy him. Karma is real, and it is coming in the form of his own daughter. Story: I hate Moo fucking dad. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and my husband is 27. He's really into fitness and goes to the gym regularly, while I've been struggling to get back in shape after having our baby boy a year ago. Recently, we went on a family holiday with my side of the family. My husband got along really well with everyone, especially my aunt, who's 47 and also very fit. She goes to the gym a lot too. My husband has always had some unusual gym-related fantasies, asking me to do things like lift weights in front of him. After Easter at my grandparents' house, most of the family went to my uncle's place, leaving only a few of us behind. My grandparents have a small, rarely used in-house gym that one of my uncles built. While I was feeding our son, my husband disappeared with my aunt for about half an hour, saying she was going to show him some workout techniques. Feeling uneasy, I asked my mom to watch the baby so I could see what they were up to. I found them in the gym, with my husband lying on the floor and my aunt squatting weights above him, her bum right over his face. Both of them swore they haven't cheated or had sex and begged me not to tell anyone. After speaking to my aunt later, she informed me that my husband wanted me to stand on his balls and squat but refused, saying it was weird. Well, should I divorce my husband? Story: The Secrets of Royal Children's Haven. Hi everybody, I'm 30 years old now, my income is about 3x/month. Currently, I am increasingly stuck in my relationship with my biological mother. Is there anyone here in the same situation who can share? Ever since I graduated from school and started working, my mother always compared me with children A, B, C, X, Y, Z. One day I asked him why he didn't work in construction, one day he did IT, another day he did architecture, one day his brother and sister worked in MMO and just bought a house. The salary was very high, one day his friend who worked at VCB got money from the copper sewing fund. Serve up to 5 million, why don't you work in a bank? Every time I hear where A, B, C earns 15 to 20 million, they come back and show off. I'm bored, so I never share about my work and salary. The conversation between mother and daughter is always only a few sentences, and always revolves around salary and income. I have never seen her ask how the job was, if she liked the job, if there were any difficulties, or any words of support. In 2018, my best friend came to wish me a Happy New Year, and she also asked her friend to advise me on changing careers. After a while, I went to Hanoi to work. During pandemic 2020, the company allowed WFH for about 2 weeks. I went home for a while. During these 2 weeks everything was okay. On the last day I planned to withdraw money and give it to her as food and living expenses for those 2 weeks before going to Hanoi. But things didn't go as planned. As soon as I finished lunch and went up to the room to rest, my grandmother rushed into the room and scolded me, saying that I was too old to think. How many days had I lived without being able to give any money, and that I had no responsibility towards the family? He even pulled out a notebook and said he had recorded all the money I had given her so far, then threw it in my face and told me to look at it. I'm bored and don't want to say anything again. Wait until you're done talking, withdraw money, give it, then book a car to go to Hanoi. 2. I've only been married for 2 years. Recently, I had a small child for a few months, so I couldn't go back to my paternal hometown, district in Bac Giang, to visit my uncle and aunt before Tet. After Tet, I came home to play until the 4th, then booked a car to go to my wife's hometown, also Bac Giang, but it's a city, not convenient to go through the countryside, before going to Hanoi. During Tet, cars are expensive and there are a lot of trips, so the couple booked a shared car. As soon as I got in the car and was about to leave, my grandmother knocked on the door and told me to go to my grandfather's hometown to celebrate the New Year. At that time, I didn't have time to do anything else, and the road was inconvenient, so I told her to go to this car to drop off a fixed passenger. She couldn't go like that. Thinking everything was over, the other day she went to Hanoi to visit. After talking for a while, she told her family that they don't have money to go anywhere. I was so upset that after talking for a while, she said that even when I go back to my hometown, I don't have money to book a car. If I have money, I'll book the whole car and go wherever I want, and I'll turn wherever I turn. Everyone knows that the bus only runs on fixed routes. Even if you book the bus, it won't wait for you because in that time it can run 1 to 2 more trips. Not to mention the price on Tet holidays will be 1.5 equals x.2 on weekdays. I was so shocked that I couldn't stand it, so when I argued, I brought up the story that A, B, and C had just been working for a few years and bought a house. It's so boring that I don't even bother to say it again. Houses in Hanoi are about 3 million VND/unit. If you work for 5 years and are able to buy a house on your own, that's also an excellent form of society. I know that you'll go somewhere else and then come back and say it again, but it's okay. I'm bored and don't want to argue anymore because it won't get me anywhere. Before getting married, my wife worked very hard. Due to the nature of her job, she worked 6 days a week, working from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. continuously for 3 years, so before getting married, she quit her job to refresh for a few months. Then when I went back to work, I was still pregnant, so work was not the same as before. This is almost the end of 6 months of maternity leave, but because the baby was born prematurely, the two planned to let their wives take more time off and find a temporary job to work at home to take care of the baby, partly because they don't want her to come down and take care of them. It's less work, but it's extremely difficult. Headache. She knew that, so she constantly pressured her to go work for the company. In her eyes, her wife stayed home all day off and was a freeloader, refusing to go to work. To explain, the reason was that in the neighborhood, yes, in the neighborhood, there was a child A who had been on maternity leave for 2 months and left her child at home with her grandparents to look after her so she could go to work. I'm sure this case is only a minority, and for many reasons, not many mothers would feel secure in doing so. She also gave herself the example that in the past, she gave away her baby at 3 months, but today, there are no kindergartens that accept 3-month-old babies. She also talked to her wife in private many times, at the peak of which she told her that if she didn't go to work, you'd starve to death, while our family was fully able to pay for living expenses. Buying a house is determined by circumstances and will take a long time, but as long as you can't buy a house, it will probably be talked about for a long time. In fact, this National Assembly relationship is becoming more and more deadlocked day by day. I know that for many reasons, partly because of the characteristics of her previous job, partly because of her high expectations for her children, she is like that. But her constant comparison and blind pressure without a specific solution makes me more and more stressed and tired. Many times I want to give up, just stay in Hanoi and then go back to my hometown to play for Tet. But thinking back, I was the only child and my father passed away early, so I couldn't do that. Story: I was right about my stepdad. My mom got married to this guy after only knowing him in person for 1 day before getting engaged. I had a really difficult time with this guy because he was constantly making sexual innuendos to me about my mom and in general, behind her back. He played cruel mental games with me and my siblings. He was physically abusive as well, mostly to my youngest brother. But to my mom and the people in his circle, he displayed himself as an aging bachelor who always wanted a family. Everyone saw him as this kind, family-oriented, would do anything for ya kind of guy. He controlled this narrative that I was a messed up kid who was into boys, alcohol, and drugs. I barely experimented at 13, so minuscule it was laughable, so he had to keep a tight leash on me. I would try and tell my mom about how cringe he was, and she would always blow me off. After an especially brutal incident with my little brother, I reported it to a teacher at my school. Because of his good old boy reputation, and how he represented me as a troubled teen trying to cause drama, no one did anything about it, and he actually threatened to kill me if I opened my mouth again. The happiest day of my life is when he requested to be transferred out of the country to make more money. He eventually divorced my mom, but before he did we had found this really explicit letter that a woman had written to him about how much she loved him raping her and how all she wanted in life was to be his sex slave. She went on and on about all the rough things she wanted him to do to her, and how often she thought of all the wild sex they had many years prior. She said she loved him and wanted to leave her husband to be with him, even knowing that he was married. My mom just gave me the rest of the letters she found over 25 years ago, and it was revealed that all of the letter writers talk about the wild sex that they had was when she was a young teen at summer camp, and he was her camp counselor. He was having rough, wild sex with a young teenage girl at summer camp when he was an adult. It makes me sick to my stomach to know that this is who I had been exposed to as a young girl at the time myself. My mom barely knew him and left me to live with him by myself for months. This also supported a suspicion I had that he had a sexual relationship with a girl I went to high school with, while we were 15 at the time. I didn't have proof, but I remember he had a secret meeting with her parents and all of a sudden she wasn't at school anymore. After he divorced my mom, she had found a pay stub showing he was paying child support for a kid we had no idea about. Long story short, this guy always gave me the ick. I was always uncomfortable around him and pleaded with my mom to see how sick he was, but no one would believe me. I was right all along. I went down a rabbit hole today trying to see if he ended up with the summer camper turned erotica/SM writer. She actually ran for a political position a few years after the letters were written. She has no idea where those letters are now. She has very specific handwriting. I would never publish these and expose her, but I can't help but think about how she has no idea of where these sensitive letters are. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.